to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax, and we have a really great conversation for all of you to listen into today. Our guest is David Sammel. Dave is a world prominent tennis coach based in the UK, who's coached dozens of professional players and international junior players. He's also the author of the book Locker Room Power, Building the Mind of an Athlete, as well as the founder of Mindset College, an online course designed to help athletes and others transform their fears and doubts into a winning mindset. So in this conversation, Josh and I talked to Dave about what locker room power is, how to develop it, and how to apply it in competition. And this includes the concept of mentally unsettling the opponent and using courage as a virtue. Overall, I think you'll find that Dave shares a lot of wisdom from his experiences as a player and coach that I think anyone listening to this episode will come away with some new and helpful perspectives that can be applied to tennis and life. So with that, we hope that you enjoy our conversation with David Sammel. David Sammel, want to welcome you to the Tennis IQ podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. So we had a previous guest on our podcast some months ago, Marius Bernard, and he talked to us about your book, Locker Room Power, Building the Mind of an Athlete. And, Josh and I both went out, got this book, and just really, really great stuff. And I can't wait to dive into a lot of this with you because I think it's going to be extremely helpful for the Tennis IQ podcast audience. But before we do that, would love for you to give us a brief introduction to you, how you got involved with the sport of tennis and coaching, and how that's led you to where you are today.
I grew up in South Africa, and we had a court in our backyard. All my older sisters played. So, I actually don't remember not being able to hit a tennis ball. I can't remember not. I do remember my first tournament and losing 7-love. I don't know what, I think it was best of 7 games. And lost to a guy called Carsten Pop, who actually lives in California now. And I lost 7-love to him. And then I remember, I think I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And then in the under 12s, I remember I beat him pretty comfortably. So I was pretty happy with that. But yeah, then I started playing tournaments. I was one of the best juniors in South Africa all the way through. And then I got recruited to play for the University of Texas by Kevin Curran, who was a South African, obviously made finals of Wimbledon. And I played a year at Texas. I wasn't that enamored with the coach. And 2 of my friends got recruited to North Texas. And a coach called A.G. Longoria, who had built the Pan American program to number 7 in the nation. And he got recruited by North Texas, who were pushing at that time to get in the Southwest Conference. And he had done it on foreign players, basically, at Pan American. So he recruited all 3 of us, actually, and I transferred to North Texas. And I was able to do that because they weren't yet in the Southwest Conference, which they were pushing to become part of. And, we were a good team. We were top 25 in the nation. But unfortunately, for my senior year, the funding just dried up, and the coach left, and the athletic director left in a cloud, and they didn't make the Southwest Conference. So my senior year wasn't the greatest, but I had 2 fabulous years there as well. And then I went and played pro tennis, and the only way I could survive in pro tennis was to play a lot of money tournaments in Europe. France, Germany, Belgium, and Holland. And then I got a club contract to play for a club in Holland, which was kind of a mainstay of my income. And then I would save money and then go pay, in those days, satellites. They didn't have futures. They were 5 weeks to get your points. There weren't very many challenges at all. You can make top 100 on futures. But it would drive you a bit balmy. And then basically, I got to a point of playing satellites, 600 ranking and a lot higher in doubles, and just thought, you know what am I doing? I make all of this money all the time playing money tournaments and for the Dutch club, and then I blow it all playing satellites, trying to get the ranking going all the time. If you're a professional tennis player, play professional tennis for money. So what I did is for about 9 months, I just played as many ATP qualifying events as I could, and had a good time doing that. And said, see, if I don't break through and my ranking goes down, then I'll just play for money, which is that's what happened. And I'd say I was a professional tennis player who played money tournaments and for a Dutch club. And then the Dutch club called me. I remember I had one more bash at pro tennis, and they called me and said, look, this summer, instead of just coming and playing for the club, would you like to be player coach for the first 3 teams and spend the summer with us? You can still go play your tournaments when there's not club matches on the weekend. And so I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds good. And the money was even better. So I did it. And I really enjoyed it. And then they asked me back the second year to do the same thing, but also to coach their 2 junior teams as well. And then they offered me the pro shop, but they had somebody there who could run it for me. And I said, okay. And that year we became champions of Holland. So I was playing and coaching at the same time. And it was a great time. And then there was a girl in the team who was very good. She was 18 years old. And her father, had enough money to put her on tour, and asked me if I would, in the winter, go on tour with her before, and then come back and she'd play for the club again and stuff. So that winter, I started touring around with her, and played a little bit myself as well. And then, that kind of grew. So I started, doing the Dutch club and coaching her on tour, and start to really enjoy the coaching side. But I don't say I'd ever kind of retired from tennis. I just, carried on playing money tournaments when I could. I remember one time we were playing a grass court tournament, and unfortunately they scheduled me at the same time as her, and she was playing on the court next to me, which was an absolute nightmare because I really needed to be watching her. So, and at that point I thought, no, I can't play any more tournaments at the same time as her. But it led me into coaching. And then the Dutch club, unfortunately, didn't have any indoor courts, and they asked for planning permission, didn't get it. And there was an indoor center. My wife is English, so I'd moved to England in the winter months, and practiced. And they had effectively the same as the World Team Tennis that you have in the States. For 2 years, they had it in the UK, and I captained the Manchester team. So I got quite well known there as the best player in the area, and that was also great fun. And that indoor club asked me if I'd start, do some coaching there. And then the Lawn Tennis Association came and said, we've got this center of excellence that we do in the evenings twice a week. Will you come and help with that? And so that side started to grow, and I decided to quit the Dutch club because it was only a summer job anyway, and got more seriously into coaching in the UK. And from then on, very quickly, I did well with players and ended up on tour with players. And I've been there ever since, so it's over 30 years.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic story. I love that. And sort of Yeah, you didn't really retire from tennis. You just sort of slowly transitioned from player to
Yeah,
coach, and it even overlapped. You know, you don't often hear that story.
yeah. I think the good thing about that is I didn't go through what I call a period of mourning.
Yeah.
Most players, when they retire, they have a really tough sort of year or two where they're looking at all the results and everything like that. But I was easing down, and still playing, and didn't really have that period. It just the coaching became, more about the obviously the players, and I just didn't have the time to play. But I'd say into my 40s, I was still hitting with the players a lot, and then you just get fat and lazy. and and yeah, and so yeah, it's slowly over time it just no longer was. But I didn't really feel like, oh, I actually stopped playing tennis.
Yeah, right. No, that's really cool. Before we get into the details of Locker Room Power, the book, what inspired you to write this? What inspired you to get this info out to the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really came about in the late 1990s. I started working with some of the best male players in Britain, and I recognized something in them. In that, at that time, apart from Tim Henman, uh, everybody seemed to always come into every situation as an underdog. And I learned this actually on tour myself, because when I was playing, obviously Borg was the big thing, and then Wielander and then Edberg. And on tour, the Swedes kind of had this aura about them, so cool, calm, collected, none of them showed any emotion out there. They had lots of good players, and they were very intimidating. And then I I played doubles and roomed with a guy called Ulf Peterson, who was a very good player and had all of this on court. But in traveling with him, this guy was, you know, a bit fruity and all over the shop, and it kind of broke a myth in my head that these are just normal guys who have their own problems and their own demons and everything like that, which I kind of didn't really realize, and that broke a ceiling for me. Is that all players have their issues, and there's nobody who's perfect out there, and so, but I did notice it with the British players that they, at that point in time, they tend to buy into everybody else's locker room power, and as I said, come in as an underdog and feel like that they weren't good enough, and that they had to play out of their minds or whatever to beat a lot of players. And we started traveling. In fact, the first player that I did a lot with at a high level was Andrew Richardson, who coached Raducanu to this US Open title. And Flex, as we called him, was an extremely talented player. And one of the things that I'd speak to him about is, I started calling it locker room power. That if people see you training hard and you're on a mission, that actually creates a power. And instead of seeing the other players as being, the guys who are, maybe not just working harder, but something, have something special about them or whatever, it's just not true. But you can create this aura for yourself. And then I worked with, several others, Miles McLagan, Arvin Palmer, Barry Cowan, Martin Lee, and, took them all to their career highest rankings. and started working with Jez Green, the physical trainer who went on to train Andy Murray and Zverev. And I actually coached him as a junior. And he came back after studying sports science at Loughborough, which is a famous sports university in the UK, and said, look, I want to work with players. And I said, well, yeah, I'm your answer, but I can't pay you a lot. But he took the risk and came with me and helped me with these players. And we talked to them a lot about, because it seems obvious now, but I would say we were the first people to really pioneer off-season training for tennis players. I mean, we got it all wrong the first time. We had, it was for Arvin, Marty, and Barry on an off-season training block. And, Jess said, look, I need 6 weeks to really change these guys physically, to really transform them. So we had them on a brutal training block for 6 weeks, no tennis. And then we started with the tennis, and we did a couple of weeks of sort of tennis and a bit of training. And then we went to Florida, they were all fired up and pumped because they were in the best shape of their lives, and they couldn't play. I mean, they'd been too long without really playing, and they just couldn't play. So the first month after that training block was very, very difficult. And slowly they got in swing of it. And basically they had a very good year after that. But we learned from that even in a training block, players need to keep a feel of the ball. So, we adjusted it to where, training was the main thing. But for 45 minutes, an hour a day, they would play some tennis. And I actually learned then that short and sharp, when you're talking about technical training, short and sharp actually works brilliant. So in these like 30 to 45 minute little blocks, we do technical stuff because, of course, physically they were, really shot because of all the training, and do some really key technical stuff without them moving that much. And they picked it up pretty quick, and it seemed to really, and from that point, I realized that, spending 2 hours on technique, no. Talented players will pick up things pretty quick, and you can almost keep working at it till it breaks down, and then they get nervous about it. And actually, if you do it in short, sharp chunks, it doesn't mean that they get it very quickly, but they haven't got it until you see it in a match, and that will take time. Different things take different amounts of time. But it was a very important lesson for me that you could teach people a lot in short space of time, and they actually learn better that way. You could keep revisiting it if you didn't see it in matches and stuff, but they would get things actually very quick, and they'd leave with a lot of confidence because the feel-good factor was very high because they were succeeding very quickly at something. Not that it stuck. I want, none of us are magicians, but over time it would stick, and then suddenly you see it in a match and you go, "Oh, beautiful!" Because when they can do it under pressure, then it's really in there and part of them. So yeah, and we became known on the Challenger Tour, especially, as basically the hardest working crew. I mean, we were doing the physical work, we're doing the footwork training, and we're doing the tennis stuff. And they started to realize that they actually had locker room power, and that other players were starting to fear them. And so, that got me to think is that, we all know this, top players have an aura about them, in any sport. And what is it? What does that do? And the best way I can explain it is, let's say, you're going against, Novak Djokovic, and you go to the net, say, you go, forehand line and in, and he hits a passing shot down the line, and it's a good one. I think for that split second, a player will go, "Oh no," because it's Novak. and that makes them a split second slow, and suddenly they duff the volley or don't make the volley. Whereas if they're going against Joe Bloggs and they hit exactly the same shot, they don't hesitate at all, and they just go and, cut off maybe a tough volley, but cut it off. Because they're not nervous, or if you think on the football field, when Ronaldo lines up or Messi for a free kick, the goalkeeper's nervous, everybody's nervous. And when people are nervous, they're slower, they make mistakes. So there is a physical manifestation of locker room power where players don't perform as well against the players that have this aura. And that means that they have an advantage. And they know they have this advantage, there's many examples in the books where, top athletes in all sports talk about the advantage that they have and know about it. So what I felt like I could do was give this aura a name, which I called locker room power, because that's what I've been using with the guys. And I thought, well, I'll start just writing some articles about it, which I did. And then suddenly I had a bunch of articles about it that I thought, you know what, if I put this together properly, it's actually a book. And that's how the book came about. And the hardest thing actually about the book was the editing and getting the right order, because I had a lot of this random stuff written down and notes from with the guys and everything like that. And then to get it in an order that kind of made sense, and then to edit it to a way that it becomes easy to read. And I was very, very keen to not put any fluff in there, because originally the book was about 70 pages longer. And then I read a book, I won't say which one it was, a very good book, but it did follow the thing like, tell them what they need to know, repeat what they need to know, and then tell them again what they need to know. And I thought, well, this is a great book if it was just, 100, 150 pages shorter. And then I went back and looked at mine and thought, you know what doesn't need to be there? And so I wanted the book to be, no more than sort of a 2.5 hour read, and very to the point. So I hope you guys found it that way.
Absolutely. I thought it was well organized and right to the point. It was a very enjoyable read, and I kept noting throughout while reading it how it was in a nice progression, because I have a book as well, but it tends to be more like the random stuff, and I didn't get as much help on organizing all of that. And so I really appreciated the way you had put that together, David. So I think you were successful.
Yeah, and I'll say to you, if you got a book, the hardest part is the editing. It really does, and the rewrites and stuff like that. But once I'd got my head in the fact that I wanted the book, I was able to do that. But I suppose it was actually written over about 5 years. And then in 2019, I updated it. And now subsequently, I've actually created an online course called Mindset College, which incorporates locker room power, but it's got a lot more to it. It's a full, 32-hour course. But it takes in other things outside of tennis, like judgment and comparison and communication triangles and stuff like that. So it's a far bigger project.
I know we definitely want to dive more into Mindset College, but regarding locker room power, and for different athletes out there, maybe not at the level of the people referenced in the book, at the club level, at the college level, or even at the lower ranks of the professional levels. How can athletes, regardless of their level, help to build more of that aura against their competition?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And what I will say is locker room power exists at every single level. So when you play in a club, there's the guy or the girl to beat, and there's the club champion and they have some stuff that people fear. So I'd say the first step to building locker room power is to understand what your weapons are. When you know what your weapons are, then you have something to build upon that says, this is what opponents are going to fear. And, it's not just a forehand or backhand or serve or volley. It's foot speed, it's mental strength. I love that, often it's like, the club hacker. Well, usually the club hacker is the best tennis player because they put the ball in the court and they put it in often awkward spots that people don't like. And because they make a lot of balls, they become a hacker. But the reality is a lot of hackers are, pretty damn good tennis players. And then, if you want to be a more attacking player, you got to know what it is in your arsenal that hurts people, and the way to attack that's gonna hurt people, and a way to attack that's gonna beat the hacker. And if you're very good at, say, attacking the net, but you got no overhead, then you better make sure that you learn how to hit an overhead at least, pretty well, because I say this, your weapons are your most important things because that's what creates a fear. Your weaknesses, don't worry about them unless they prevent you from using your weapons. And if they prevent you from using your weapons, then you need to strengthen them to the point that you can actually, use your weapons. There's no point in having a great rocket launcher if the tractor pulling it or whatever, or the truck that pulls it doesn't work and you can't actually get in position to fire on the enemy. So, so the first step to building locker room power is to really identify a minimum of two strengths, two things that people would fear. The second thing about locker room power is to understand that the locker room is everywhere. It's the restaurant, it's the locker room, it's the practice court, it's how you conduct yourself everywhere in public, and people look at that. So if you say, yeah, I'm really serious about getting fit, because if I get fit, my tennis is good, and then I know I can win, and people see you hanging out at McDonald's a lot and Burger King and all of these places, and not really, doing a lot of training, but you say, yeah, no, I'm really getting fit. It's not believable. So you're not building locker room power. But if they see you suddenly starting to eat healthily, out on runs and doing some training and being drilled by your coach, and you start to create a mission around yourself. That is what we did with the guys that we worked with, Jez and I, is we started to create an aura of, wow, these guys are working incredibly hard. And, sometimes on purpose, we go out at 7 a.m, and be there before anybody arrives. So when they arrive, they just see you already finishing up. And that, that becomes intimidating, especially if they're in a tough match with you. So, and then, the last thing that you need to be is actually good enough at the level that you're playing at. Because if all of this is great, but you do also have to at some point get results. Because people are not, you could have a great mission going, be incredibly fit, know what your weapons are, and all of this, and mentally, feel like you're pretty tough. But if you never win a match, there's no fear there. So ultimately, all of this has got to lead to more winning. Or when you do lose, it's a real scrap, and people see that it's not an easy match, and if they're going to beat you, they're going to have to suffer a little bit, and then and that's the formula of locker room power. You have to have the desire to do the work. You you need to have a belief, and this is really important, and I'd say this is something that has evolved over since I wrote the book. Is it's not really about having belief in yourself, it's having belief in your process. And the way I explain it is, if you go to the gym and you can, let's say, squat 60 kilos and you want to get to 120, and you decide that every day you're going to put 120 on the bar and go positive thinking, come on, I can lift this, come on, I can do it, come on. And every day you do the same thing, in a year's time, you still can't lift 120. But if you, get a trainer on board and you get good technique and you go through a process of learning, you still don't believe that you can lift 120 because you're at 60. But over time, by the time you get to 110 and you've been through the process of getting stronger all the time, you have enormous belief in yourself that you're going to make 120. So is believing in yourself the most important thing, or believing in your process? And for me, I think actually if you believe in your process, you learn to believe in yourself because you get competent and good enough to believe in yourself. And I don't know if you guys saw, but Liam Brody, who I work with, won his first challenger yesterday. And it was his ninth final. And, one of the things I said to him before he went on court is, this is different from the other finals because you are now a good enough tennis player to win this. Whereas the other times you were a good tennis player who had gotten on a roll and gotten to a final, but were actually playing a player maybe that was better than you at that point in time. But now you are good enough. And if you're good enough and you play your game, you're going to be very difficult to beat. And I would say that his belief in himself yesterday was higher than the other finals because he knew how well he could play. Before, he also knew how well he could play, but he also knew it wasn't as good as he can now. So, what gave him the belief yesterday, or the greater belief yesterday, I would say that he was a better tennis player than he was on the previous occasions. So it's not just all about, people say it's all in the head. At every level, it's all in the head. But the other analogy I give about that is if you put someone, Rafa Nadal, 5 miles from the North Pole in a t-shirt and shorts and say walk to the North Pole in those conditions, he's going to die no matter how mentally tough he is. Now, he might be so tough that he walks 150 meters before he dies, and a mentally weak person stands there and goes, oh, I'm going to die, and dies on the spot. But the reality is, if you don't have the equipment around you, the right equipment, you're not going to make it to the North Pole. You've got to have the right clothing and everything like that. And the same as an athlete and a tennis player, you need to get better and better at what you do, so you have the right equipment that's going to be robust enough at whatever level you're at to win at that level. And when you can win at a certain level, that's when you can make the jump to the next level. But again, when you get to the next level, you'll have to become even more robust in order to survive there. And that's the process that you have to go through. But if you believe in that process, that I'll just keep getting better, then you at each level you're going to get greater and greater locker room power.
I like how you're mixing this, David, like, essentially trusting the process leading to self-belief. And I think maybe even the transition stage there is like you're developing self-efficacy, this idea of, yes, I can.
Yes.
Developing more optimism along that. So I think that's really great because that's stuff that's really grounded in sports psychology of like what we're trying to do, and the idea of helping players to understand that they must trust their process so that they can go through this, which will then develop self-belief. I think this was a lot of what Marius actually talked about with us on our podcast episode with him. So it's a nice tie-in. I also like your concept of weapons This reminds me of a concept that I like to use, which is called, and it involves weapons, but it's helping people understand their competitive identity, which is your weapons plus their purpose. So, in terms of how you use your weapons, and I think in your language, to unsettle the mind of your opponent.
That's correct.
I might say something similar, more about like mentally breaking your opponent, which is a big fighter's mind type of thing. Talk a little bit about unsettling the mind of your opponent, and why that's key to being a good competitive tennis player.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm not a big one for gamesmanship at all.
Right.
However, psychologically, you've got to be aware, and you've got to know when somebody's trying to, in the UK, we'll say, take the piss. So, a recent example was Andy Murray with Tsitsipas and the long toilet break. Now, that unsettled Andy, but he just didn't lay back there and take it. He actually said something about it and tried to put some pressure on the officials and everything like that to maybe do something different and put some pressure on Tsitsipas. It didn't work, and I think because Andy has obviously been out for so long, I think in the past he would have been able to use that as fuel to drive him forward, but he dropped serve very early on because he was irritated and annoyed, and then he was behind the 8 ball and really, couldn't really get back in the match. But he would have used that as fuel in the past, and probably tried to this time, but hasn't had as many matches as he would have liked. But it's really important to understand that if somebody is doing something that's bothering you, you need to do something to counteract it. Unless you are genuinely calm about it and it doesn't bother you, then stay calm and be on board, never said a word about anything, and train himself to be incredibly calm no matter what. But if it's bothering you, you have to do something about it, because otherwise you're immediately giving them the edge that they want to create. You're giving them what they want. So if you get irritated and annoyed and then, don't play as well, like, in the end of the day, and I don't know this, but Tsitsipas could be sitting there and going, well, the long break worked. And he came out irritated and I broke serve. So that's really what I'm talking about in unsettling a person's mind. The other thing is making statements is really, really important in sport. So if somebody, I remember, because both Arvin Palmer and Barry Cowan had a famous 5-set match against Sampras, and Arvin was a set and a break up against Sampras. It was very rare. I don't know if I've ever seen it before, but Sampras dropped serve the first game of the second set against Arvin, and on the changeover, he slammed his racket down on his bag. He was bothered. And what I said to those guys is, especially on the ad court, Sampras loved to serve down the tee. I said, give him the wide, move early, and hit the living hell out of that tee serve and try to hit winners. Because it doesn't matter, I was a big server, and I said, it doesn't matter who you are. If you hit a great serve and somebody hits a clean winner, it hurts and it rocks you. And so I think it's really important game-wise to make statements. If somebody is taking a ball really early and really got you on the back foot, serve and volley a point. Take a couple early yourself and try to, what I call bomb Berlin. I don't know if you know that story, but Churchill bombed Berlin. out of nowhere, just to let the Germans know that there was a war on, because they didn't know there was a war on. It would have been like, Iraq bombing New York. It was such a surprise to the Germans. But what it did is it unsettled Hitler and made him angry. And instead of bombing the airfields, he started bombing the cities to get revenge, which allowed Britain to get the planes in the air, and was a big reason for turning the war, because they could defend the skies. So there are times when you're losing where you need to bomb Berlin, and take a risk and see if you can unsettle their rhythm, unsettle what they're doing. I think another good way of doing this is on return of serve. Change your position. Go further back, go closer in, take away one serve, stand over, force them to hit the other one, stand over and move early for the other one. Just try to, mess with their mind so they can't just stand there and get in a great rhythm and just do what they're doing. So that, I think that's a big part of unsettling opponents. I don't know if you remember Dementieva playing the French girl at the US Open. Mary Pierce. Dementieva was killing her, and Mary Pierce called a trainer, lay down on the court, got a nice massage, and you could see Dementieva at the back of the court fuming. And if she had just walked up and stood, she's lying there nicely on the floor, and put her foot right near Mary Pierce's head and said to the umpire, how long is this going to take? How long is she, and she can feel her foot right there by her head. That's putting pressure on Pierce to hurry up, and switching the mentality from, hey, I'm just chilling here and getting my head together and deciding what she's going to do. Suddenly she's under pressure as well, and she's not going to be able to just have that time to think that straight. So, it was really bothering Dementieva, but she did nothing about it, came out, played poorly, Mary Pierce back in the match and wins the match. So, you've got to be aware of what's going on there. And if it's unsettling your mind, do something about it. And equally, if they're doing some, or playing in a way that's really hurting you, try and do something to combat it. I hope that makes sense.
No, perfect sense. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I really like that idea of, in these sorts of situations, it's all about taking action and, looking to do something yourself to maybe unsettle the opponent or to somehow respond in some way. An idea that I really liked from the book, and I love the analogies that you use. And one of the analogies of the ladder I really liked, of, going back to where you're talking about with that process, and not putting 120 kilograms on the bar if you can only handle 60, but slowly working your way up and, having that process to get there. And also thinking about the ladder in terms of, they each step along the way, you only have something to gain. And that, you don't want to be constantly looking down from the ladder or thinking about the others that didn't get to that rung that you're at. Can you talk a little bit more about this analogy and how this fits into the player development process?
Yeah, I think I use the ladder up the side of a building analogy, and that's really, especially for young players, is first of all, climb your own ladder, and it's lots of fun. You start off on your ladder at the bottom on the ground, and you climb really fast, but suddenly you 40 yards up, and you look down and you go, oh, not sure I want to fall from here. And so you're going to be a little bit more cautious about how you climb, which is what happens, in sport. You develop quite quickly as a youngster and you get pretty good. And then suddenly it's like, whoa, I'm pretty good. And everything slows down. But if you think about it, the ladder is, what I say, is just about playing to gain. So there'll be periods, when you're climbing that ladder, that you're going to go slower. and also, once you get maybe 150 yards up, and you're very good, and it starts getting windy, or hail starts going, or it gets pretty cold and difficult. You're going to just want to hang on. You're not going to want to climb. You just kind of want to hang on. And I think that's important, that there are times in your development where you're doing work and nothing's happening. You just don't seem to be getting better. You're just hanging on. But remember, if you're hanging on, you're not going down. You're not getting worse. You're just staying where you are. And just work hard to get up the next rung. However long it takes, just get up the next rung. And, the sun will come out again, and you can climb a little faster. And that's, and then you make hay while the sun shines, and then, the different seasons hit, and you have to adjust for the seasons. In the winter, you're not going to be climbing at all, or very, very slowly. And, spring, you start feeling, like better about things, and can climb a little faster as well. And I think that's important, that, whether it's even in a match, if you're losing in a match, just play the game, say, I'm going to try and get 2 points a game, get to 30 every game, and build from there, or just, try and just get one game on the board. And so you always have this target, because even if you're getting killed, 6 love, 3 love, instead of being all down and depressed and feeling like this is terrible and everything, you know what? This person's clearly better than I am. My job is just to win a game, fight for everything and win a game. And then you have a focus to gain something out of that match, and you will be gaining something out of that match. So I think it's important to always play to gain, even if it doesn't go your way. I don't know if that fully explains it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I was reading it, that analogy.
One other thing is comparison. If you high up and you want to climb the next rung, tell me you're going to be able to climb the next rung at 250 yards in the air if you're looking around at everybody and how they're going on their ladders. There's no way you can move a muscle. So remember, while you're comparing yourself to everybody else and how well they're doing, you're not doing the work yourself. Focus on your ladder. Every now and again, stop, have a little survey of what everybody else is doing, and then back to your own ladder. And the top of the game doesn't get better by yards. It gets better by millimeters. So it doesn't, really matter. And this is something I've spoken to players about, because age becomes a thing. Somebody, I'm not as good as they are, and they're so much further ahead. I said, look, nobody cares if you get to the top of the game. And it takes some people longer than others. But the important thing is to understand, keep going forward, because it's easier now as you get closer to the top. And McEnroe said it best, which is, the hardest jump I ever had to make was from 2 to 1. Because the differences become so subtle and so small, you got to do, if you do 10x of work in the beginning, you get 10x return. Get into the higher levels, you do 10x of work and you get a millimeter return, 0.01x return. So you got to do 20x to get, 1x return. Because obviously, the capabilities and the margins become smaller and smaller. So you can take your time getting there, or you can get there fast. Some people go very fast early, then they slow down. Some go fast in the middle, then slow down. And you can see it through rankings. Players come very fast. Shapovalov, remember how fast he came, and now he's kind of gotten a little stuck. He's still a great player, but I'm sure, he had aspirations and still does of being, top 5 or higher. And he's finding it a little more difficult to do that last bit, but he he flew through the ranks, and so this is, everybody has their own speed, and you can't pretend that you're the same as anybody else.
Yeah, the concept, David, reminds me of a book by a guy named George Leonard, Mastery, and he talks about how plateaus are not necessarily a bad thing. They're actually more natural, and you're sort of describing that there are going to be some plateaus. Maybe a Shapovalov just happens to be on one, but if he continues to trust his process, there will probably be a bump at a certain
Yes.
point in time, right? And I think it's having that knowledge again of trusting your process and knowing that, hey, plateaus are not a bad thing. I'm not getting worse. I'm just, let me continue along that path. Toward the end of the book, you have a chapter by Louise Scott, who is a sports psychology professional, and she talks about the theoretical underpinnings of your approach. And I really I like that chapter. I'm so glad that you put that in there. And she mentioned how much of your approach comes from existential psychology and philosophy, which is not necessarily a commonly known branch of psychology, but really very interesting. And a concept that's in there that I think applies even to the latter is this idea of courage, and how perhaps even playing without fear is not a reasonable thing. It's really more how we apply courage to the fact that there is fear. Fear is not fear is something, or anxiety is something we can use in perhaps facilitative ways. And through courage, we can build confidence, we can continue to strive. I'd like for you, if you can, talk a little bit about how you use the concept of courage in player development, and talk to your players about that.
Yeah, very perceptive. Really good question. I like it a lot. The first thing I'd like to say is, if there's no fear, there's no need for courage. The fact that there is fear means you need courage. So that is what it's a perception people need to really get in their heads. Is it's easy to be courageous when you're winning and there's no fear. But you're not being courageous because you've got nothing to overcome. So in order to have courage, you have to have fear. And then you can start to talk about, okay, what do I need to do in certain situations when I'm afraid to show courage, to be brave? And this is, I would say, the biggest difference at all the levels. The best players in the world are the most courageous. When their whole body is screaming, I don't want to do this, they do it because they know it's percentage-wise the best way to get a result. And when they play each other, it really usually comes down to courage who wins. That, the sticking moments is, who's going to just get a little bit too tight and not pull a trigger when they need to, or not go forward when they need to, and play a little bit safe. Now, of course, it's a really difficult balance because, there are a lot of players who go a long way by playing safe in tight moments, and the other players self-destruct. They try to be brave, but don't execute. And so it's really tough. And I think for players that have had a lot of success by in those moments being brave enough to just keep the ball in the court, sometimes struggle to break to the very highest levels because they have a winning formula. And it works against most players, but not against the very best, because when they pull the trigger, on average, they make it more than they miss, and therefore, on average, they'll beat you more than they'll lose to you. So, again, it comes down to, being courageous, but also having the competence to execute with courage. But, it's the old Michael Jordan thing, I missed more shots than anybody else because, but I made the key ones because I'd taken more shots. You'd had more practice. If you take the game-winning shot every game, you might have, had a game-winning shot, I don't know, 50 times in college, and you've taken all 50. You get into the pros, and there's other guys there are trying to take that shot, and they only did 10 or 5 in their college career. Who's going to have a little more confidence? The person who's gone out and done it. Also with the complete understanding that if you're taking the game-winning shot, you're probably only going to be successful like, maybe 30 or 40% of the time. But that makes you a hero because everybody else is successful 10 or 5% of the time. So, if you show courage, you get better in those moments at executing with courage. And I always say to players, you have a choice. You can play with fear and you will win and lose matches. Or you can play with courage and guess what? You'll win and lose matches. But which way is going to be more enjoyable? And which way is developing your game to be more effective at a higher level? And that's a choice. And because I said the reason people don't show courage under pressure is because they want to win. And there's this idea that if I'm safe all the time under pressure, I've got a better chance of winning. But the reality is they will win and they will lose. But if you show courage, you will win and you will lose. And it doesn't matter how good you get, that never changes. So why not choose the one that's actually more fun and easier to come off the court and say, you know what, I don't regret I had to go and I missed. And again, I'm not saying people go out there and just be wild and because that's not courage either. Just to, people often release on shots because they've had enough of a rally. They just check out. That's not being brave. That's checking out. It's about, staying in a rally and then being able to pick the moment. And when the moment's there, then actually go. And that's, because, I've obviously been around a lot of parents and junior tennis, and you have the kids that just go for everything. And there's this, one day it'll all go in. No, it won't.
That seems to be the American tennis philosophy back in like the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah. And no, it won't. You've got to be able to put the ball in the court and work a point to create an opportunity, but from a young age, I do like it that you have periods of play where you just allow people to be very expressive and just go after things and then, slowly learn to, I suppose, marry the two together.
Yeah, I mean, both pieces are pivotal, right? As you become a better and better player. And another idea is from the book is this idea of not trying too hard, not forcing too much, but being able to let things happen a little bit, and which I think definitely connects to that idea of trusting the process, of knowing that you're doing the right steps, doing the right things on a day in, day out basis to get closer to your goals. Just wanted to see if you could expand a little more on that idea.
Well, again, this past weekend, pour out one of the things that I say in the book, which is, do the work and good things will happen. You just don't know when. And I think as human beings, when we work hard, there's an expectation that we should get a good result. And that's false. It's just really like making a decision. You can make a good decision and get a bad outcome. You can make a bad decision and get a good outcome. If If I said to you, go invest all of your money, everything you got in Bitcoin, is that a good decision? Everything you got, mortgage yourself to the hilt, put everything into Bitcoin. Is that a good decision?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think anybody in their right mind would say it's a good decision. However, somebody does that and Bitcoin goes up, to 150 grand, and they cash in and got, 30 million. They'll say, "What a great decision." But from a poor decision, there was an amazing outcome. But it's just luck, and so. Making a good decision is like deciding on a good process. And if you're on a good process, ultimately, you will land up with better outcomes. And if you keep making bad decisions, ultimately, you'll land up with worse outcomes. But that doesn't mean in the meantime, you won't have some very good outcomes. So when you're playing tennis and you're sticking to good processes, overall things will get better, and that's a big trust. And we all as human beings tend to think that we're ready before we are. Get excited, worked hard, and I'm beating these guys in practice. Now I'm ready. Well, you go in the tournament and you don't, because you're maybe almost ready. And I would say this: there's a number of players that I've seen in my history in tennis that I think have quit just before it's about to happen. They had a lot of resilience, and then finally they're like, oh, it's and then sometimes you see they quit and then they come back a little bit more relaxed, maybe 6 or 9 months later. And then they actually break through because they're just more relaxed about the whole process. So, I hope that kind of explains that part.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, David, as we're coming to the end here, would love to get your thoughts on Mindset College, or maybe why you put that together, and then how people can engage with that. We'll certainly put a link to the program in our show description and show notes. But if you could talk a little bit about, how that's an expansion perhaps of Locker Room Power and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, well, with Mindset College, the book is part of the package because obviously it is a big part of my philosophy. But during lockdown, I had some time on my hands. But I'd already had in my mind to create an online program for I'd call it life skills with a competitive edge, because I actually coach a number of athletes from different sports and even some people in business now on mindset. And, I work with pro golfer, pro cricketers, track athlete. And it's very clear to me that if people haven't got a way of operating off the court that supports what they're trying to do on the court, it makes it very, very difficult as well. So, and if people's perceptions of a lot of life things and the way they communicate it or the way they receive information, and labels is another one that I tackle there, to say, that, my backhand is crap. No, that backhand wasn't very good, or that backhand was crap. Not my backhand, because that's a label. I've got a crap backhand. Well, where do you go from there? But, listen, my backhand's not as good as I'd like it to be. I'm not going to label myself as crap because I hit some good backhands. So, I want to get better at my backhand, but I will never say it's a bad backhand because that's a label. And I think, labels are very good for us to be efficient, that's a good restaurant. Everybody says good. You just trust it's a good restaurant. You don't want to research every single restaurant in the city. So, labels have their place, but in terms of in sport, it doesn't. So what I did with Mindset College is take things like labeling, judgment, expectations, comparisons, drama triangles, because, I've also, got a diploma from Cal Berkeley in executive coaching. I have a mentoring diploma from the European Mentoring Society. And so, there's theory behind all this stuff as well, but I try to make it very, very practical for athletes and coaches to take these concepts and run with them themselves. I'd say Mindset College is very, very powerful if people either do it together, a couple of athletes do it together, or a coach and an athlete, because the coach will be able to see the athlete from the outside and personalize the messaging to their specific situations. And that's incredibly powerful. So, if there's any coaches out there listening, this is not an instead of, this is an as well as. You will have a lot of skills, but what I can do and what Mindset College will do is give you some perceptions that I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have heard all of them before. And therefore help you on this journey with your athlete. And for athletes, I think it will get them very clear that, off the court is probably as important as on the court, in the way that you understand life and understand the journey that you're going on. I mean, I get into stuff like sweet suffering, because if you don't know how to suffer, you're not going to be, really good at anything. And I've got the drowning analogy in there, where, how to, deal with, basically being drowned by opponents, or drowning an opponent and being able to keep them down under the water. So these are analogies to just give people a firm concept about what they're trying to do out there, and also understanding, tennis, that, I can find you a player. I mean, I think the amazing stat is on the men's tour, between 40 and 50, those players win 49% of their matches on average. And you can find somebody at 250, at 500, and 1,000 that are all winning 50% of their matches. Why they're ranked differently? Because tennis is about spurts. If you get on a good run, that's when your ranking can go up. And so you have a period where you're winning 65, 70% of your matches where you do the climbing, but then you hit the plateau because you're at a new level, and understanding that you're never going to get to the point where you're winning 70%, 75% of your matches, unless you Novak Djokovic or, Federer and Nadal in their heydays. It's very few players that win that sort of percentage of matches. But even those players are only winning, Djokovic on the best year ever won 57% of his points. So he's still losing 43% of his points. And on average, the number one in the world wins about 54% of their points. So, you're losing 46%. So, losing in tennis is a huge part of the game. So, and a lot of, parents and players don't actually know this stuff. And it's really important, because it puts things in a better perspective and takes away some of the panic, which is, what I think I really like to do, is that people, tennis is such a wonderful game and sport is such a wonderful thing. If you're not enjoying it, you have it so often. People come into sport, they love it, they love the competing, everything. Then they get good, and it's like, oh, now I've got to win, and suddenly all the enjoyment gets sucked out, and that kills it for them. And I think that's so sad, because nobody wins all the time, and especially with very young kids, I'll say, "Would you like to win every match?" Yeah. I said, okay. I said, would you like to destroy the game of tennis? What? I said, well, think about it. If you won every single match you played, eventually you'd be number one in the world. And then who's going to come and watch you when they know that every time you're going to win? So then people would just stop watching tennis. Nobody would pay to go watch tennis. And then tennis is finished. So you'd be responsible for killing the game of tennis if you won every single match. Is that what you want? Oh, no. So, it's just getting this idea that actually it is because you don't know what's going to happen that makes sport exciting. And you need to live with that and enjoy that and relish that challenge.
Yeah, what I like about Mindset College, David, is it's a similar approach in some ways that I take is helping people develop a personal philosophy, which is really helping them create better ideas behind their thinking so that they can operate better in life and handle all these things. And, I think Mindset College is something everybody should look into. And we'll, like I said, we'll put in a link in our show notes for that. So
Thanks a lot.
would love, David, thank you so much for being with us today. I know we're up against the clock here a little bit. So thanks for being here. We really appreciate it and hope to keep in touch with you, in the future.
Great. And maybe I'll come on again in a few months or a year, see where everybody's at.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
But thank you very much. And the level of questioning was very incisive and very good, and I appreciate that. It's time's gone quickly.
Thanks
We've
so
been
much.
having fun.
Right, exactly. I'm sure we could have talked for about 6 hours, but
we don't want to put people to sleep.
Yeah, and it's getting late there in the UK, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, guys.
Well, that was an awesome conversation with David. One of my biggest takeaways from that was about the example of the ladder that he explains in his book and that we discussed. And what I really like about that is that as you think about a ladder perched atop a tall building, you have a chance in each moment, at each stage along your athletic journey, to try to reach that next stage. If you don't reach there, you're still where you started. And I think it really is a good analogy for the athletic development process, that there may be times where you really see that progress and you're getting to that next stage, and others where it feels that you've plateaued. But by keeping focused on just that next stage, not getting too ahead of yourself on trying to think about getting all the way to the end, and not looking down and thinking about the others that aren't with you at this stage in the journey, or thinking about any regrets that you may have, just staying focused on that next stage or that next step in the ladder. That's the key to that consistent improvement, and really focusing on that process rather than that outcome, and and constantly thinking about that. So I really like that analogy in the book, and I thought that particular part of the conversation was impactful for me.
Yeah, and I think if you think about the ladder too, Josh, how many players, like if they have a poor performance or something, it's almost like they think they're going down the ladder. And that's really not the case. You don't go down like 10 rungs just because you had a bad match, right? And I think this is sometimes where we maybe catastrophize things a little too much and so forth. So the idea of that ladder, right? And like you are where you are, and maybe it's one rung at a time, or however you want to approach that. It's a much better way of looking at it. So I thought that was cool. I think the thing that I liked is sort of our ending conversation with respect to courage, and how courage is actually something that can help us deal with fear and anxiety in a better way. How can we be brave enough to step up to a moment that perhaps has a little bit of pressure, has a little bit of anxiety? There may be some fear around that, and I think there are a lot of people who talk about trying to play without fear, and I don't know that that's actually realistic or possible. I think there's always going to be some level of fear or anxiety, and perhaps it's even necessary that exists, right? That's actually what makes it important to you, that there is a little bit of a level of fear or pressure or anxiety. And the way to deal with it is to be courageous, is to be brave. And so I think the more that we can cultivate courage and bravery as virtues within sporting performance, but also within our lives, I think the stronger it makes us in terms of some of the concepts we discussed, right? Self-belief, self-efficacy, and it drives your confidence. And perhaps you can even learn to make courage and bravery part of your process of what you do in specific moments and practice that, right? So I thought, I really enjoyed the conversation because we kind of, in a way, geeked out on some of these things, at a deeper level than just talking about the book, right? I think we really went well into some of these topics, and it was very, very enjoyable conversation, with Dave, and hopefully we can get him back on the podcast at some point, and discuss more even about what else he's up to these days. So with that, again, many thanks to our guest, David Sammel. And we want to thank you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. We'll have links in there to Locker Room Power, on Amazon as well as on Audible. So please check that out. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll speak with you soon in our next episode.